Welcome, Week 15, talking wide receivers. Should be an interesting week for them as well. But before we get there, me and the co-host, really, it's Jim and me, the co-host, Ricky Sanders, will be. Before we talk wide receivers, let me show you this promotion we got going on because it is pretty sweet, if I do say so myself. The Big Game 51 in Houston, Texas, sponsored by RotoCurve, rotocurve.com/big-game. Again, fantasy football world champion Scott Hansen won a trip to this big game, and you can win the same exact thing. Win free tickets plus fan experience events, 4-night trip to Houston, 2 tickets to the big game, upgraded seats, VIP tickets to Antonio Brown's celeb game, enough airfare to get you there, the all-you-can-eat Texas tailgate. You got to make sure you throw the Texas in there. There will be some Texas barbecue going on, and the Prime Sports Club pregame party with Joe Montana and Warren Moon. Some pretty cool guys to party with, if I do say so myself. Jim, let's talk wide receivers. Who do you like this week? Because I was burned by Mike Evans. I'm going to start there last week, and I am willing to go back to the bandwagon, get back on the bandwagon.
I am as well. I'm ready to go back. I think Brown is also in a bounce back spot. Antonio Brown, obviously. And it's weird because for the majority of the season, right, the elite receivers were significantly more expensive than the elite running backs. There was like an $800 gap almost every week, and now that shifted where the two elite backs, Bell and Johnson, are now, in Russell Westbrook territory in terms of just dominating the price scale. So it's interesting because there's more parity now at the top of the receiver chain, it looks like. But Evans is the guy that I trust the most here. I just think, going on the road against an offense that leads at second in the NFL in points per drive, I think the larger sample still suggests this Dallas offense is elite. Only one team has really been able to solve that riddle so far. So I think there is some interest here in just, I guess what I'm saying is the last couple of weeks, the Bucks the last month have the best defense in football. And so they've won games without needing Evans to drive the engine offensively. So, but I think the target share is still there. I still think, the opportunity is there. He's still going to get 30% of their target market. So, and Dallas doesn't have a pass rush, and their secondary is good, but I don't believe Scandrick and these guys are going to be able to shut him down. They don't have a shutdown corner per se. They actually just have a really good scheme. I think Marinelli deserves a lot of credit for what he's done there. But Evans is the high dollar guy that I trust the most. And then, it's really, I'm trying to determine between the two Denver guys. I actually like Denver's volume in cash, because of the pricing. I think it's going to be Sanders for me because I think he has more of a big playability. And, he had a couple bad drops last week. He could have had a humongous game last week against Tennessee. I think he could do some work against if he lines up with Logan Ryan. We saw the Ravens were able to get some nice, big gash plays against the Patriots. And, I just think it's a good game for volume. Like I said, I liked Simeon for similar reasons in the sense that he's passing the ball 43, 44 times a game. Well, it's the highest concentrated offense in the league, right? 31%, 32% market shares for Sanders and Thomas. So I like those two guys. I'm willing to go back to the Larry Fitzgerald bank here. I think last week was just an aberration in terms of how bad Palmer was targeting Fitzgerald. It was pretty alarming. I think he had 2 interceptions targeting him, and I think he had 2 interceptions targeting him over the last year. So it was an outlier game, I think, in just how bad Palmer was last week. But I'm willing to get a part of this 50-point total at home. Obviously, with the Michael Floyd situation being cut, it's difficult to read, past J.J. Nelson, maybe read the rest of that passing offense. And I think Fitzgerald could be, again, a volume guy here. I think he's got that 16, 17-point projection and that, 8 or 9-point floor that, puts him in that category with, some of these more elite guys. He's I don't like Amari Cooper because I think Casey Hayward could be on him. So there's some situations where there's guys that I would like getting into these 50-point totals, where, Edelman's a usage hog, but, obviously you want to fade him facing, this elite pass defense. So it's difficult to find many avenues otherwise getting into cash. And then, I don't really trust, some of these guys coming back. I don't trust Watkins yet for cash. So who do you like in cash? Because I'm kind of simple in the fact that I like 3 or 4 guys most that I'm building around, and I'm going to have more variety with my running backs.
Yeah, if you're playing the Monday slate, this is actually a much easier week
Right.
because then you can include if you like Cousins, but I really like the receivers here. And the guy
Okay.
that stands out to me is Jamison Crowder this week.
Right.
If you look at those Carolina corners, I mean, they just got nothing out of the slot. Their corner is literally ranked one of the bottom 5 in football. And, Garcon's kind of been the guy who's been ascending, and he's safe. I still definitely like him in this game, especially with the end zone targets that have started to come his way. But I think this is a big volume game for Crowder. And, with him having this huge individual advantage over the slot corner, I don't want to butcher his name, so I won't even go there. But I really think this is a week where he goes, Cousins goes back to the guy who's been basically his security blanket for most of the season. I know he's been quiet lately, but Jamison Crowder for cash games on all sites is one that I definitely love. For DraftKings, I really like Rashard Matthews against Kansas City. I mean, this is a guy at 4,600 who has shown, wide receiver 1 type upside. Not the top wide receiver of the week, but in the tier of wide receiver 1s.
Right. Not 12 upside.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is a guy who's scored a ton this year. And I mean, we're talking about a quiet game last week against the Broncos. But before that, he had scored in 4 out of his last 5 games with at least 5 targets in each during that span. So love him. And I mean, we already mentioned Mike Evans. I think if we're going Denver Broncos receivers, my preference is Demaryius Thomas slightly. And Michael Crabtree is the only other guy that I would consider for cash. And those are the list of names that I'm going to pick out of because Hayward will be on Amari Cooper. I think this is a week where Crabtree sees more volume. Who do you like for tournaments?
Yeah, for tournaments, I know it's risky to go against Xavier Rhodes and against this Minnesota defense, but I don't mind going against them in the sense that T.Y. Hilton could go back to this kind of 30% market share because it looks like Moncrief will be out. They're kind of trading targets between their tight ends. Philip Dorsett, I think, has caught like 44% of his targets this year. So, that whole narrative really hasn't played out whenever, he's had more opportunity. He hasn't done much. I think he had a season high in targets last week, still didn't do anything. So Hilton, to me, I know it's a tough matchup, but just the average depth of target is so enticing. A guy that's going to get 10 targets, and if the average depth of targets 15, 16 yards downfield, he only needs to hit on half of those to turn in, a 100-yard day. 100-point day would be amazing. But, Hilton, I think, is going to drive this offense, and he's $1,000 cheaper than that elite tier. So I just think he has that 30-point upside. Like I talked about, there's 5 or 6 quarterbacks that have 30-point upside. I'm using DraftKings as my reference. And I think that you also have a guy like Hilton who's got that 30-point upside. I'm also willing to take on Jordy Nelson for his upside. I don't love his floor because the receptions, the volume isn't always there. I mean, he's a touchdown maker is the thing, right? He leads league in touchdowns. There's always the potential for him to have 2 touchdowns, and that changes a slate. And I think, he also has that 30, 31-point ceiling. I'm willing to get into that. Plus, I want to get a piece of this Rodgers offense when I can. You talked about stacking them. We can get into that. And it's obviously a narrative. It's probably not statistically bears out, but Devontae Adams seems to trade off big games. So this would be one of his down weeks. And yeah, we have Julio Jones banged up. You can't really trust him. Odell Beckham is in a nice spot as well. I mean, if you're on Eli, which you are, I know that you said Shepard's the guy in nice position. I understand what you're saying because of pricing, but 8,000 for Beckham. Like I said, these were $9,000, $9,500 guys for much of the season, right? So to see them down at this tier is interesting. And I'm also interested, like you said, in some of the Washington guys. I like Deshaun as well. In a situation just for his ceiling, we obviously know what he can do with a single target. But those are probably my guys right now for guys that I love in terms of upside. I'm also willing to go back to the Tyrell Williams situation. I know we talked about the Raiders have been respectable in Pro Football Focus grading, but they've still given up the 5th most receiving yards to wideouts this year. And Williams is really, he's kind of fell below the radar the last couple of weeks. Inman's been doing well. He was banged up last week, Williams, and he still is banged up. But, he's got that shoulder issue. But I just want to get apart. Like you said, the Rivers might go pass heavy. I agree with you. And I think, there could be, 10, 12 targets for a guy in a game with a 50-point total. That's what we want, shares of these 50-point total games and tournaments, and I think that's a way to do it. the last one I'll mention, I'm all over is JJ Nelson. Now that it's clear that he'll have an uptick in exposure and routes, against this Saints secondary, especially going against maybe he's not going to get Delvin Pro. It just the upside he's got that Deshaun upside without the price tag.
Yeah, I'm definitely on Tyrell Williams. I love that offense. I agree with you there. Did I mention Stephon Diggs or did I skip over him? Because he was the first guy on my list.
You mentioned him in
previous video. Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to touch on him because he's definitely leading my cash list. I think he was just at the top, so I started talking about something else. But he's also on my tournament list. I really think this could be a heavy volume week for Stephon Diggs against the weak link of the Indianapolis defense out of the slot. They move him around. They're going to find good spots to get him the ball this week. And again, like I said, all those targets for Sam Bradford are in great spots. So if you're looking for a sneaky spot to stack an offense that's not usually stackable, I think this is one of those weeks. Stephon Diggs, especially on DraftKings where you get the points per reception, I think you're getting 6-7 receptions this week at the very least. And I think it could be another one of those games where there are drives that they just look to him. I mean, we saw that a few weeks ago where they were just targeting him. I mean, there was a game, I think it was his last game during that 10 reception streak where they just targeted. He caught 5 balls on the final drive alone. So I think this is a game where he could be dominant once again. I really like him. For tournaments, I like Brandon Cooks if we're talking individual matchups here. That Marcus Cooper matchup was the same reason that people like Taylor Gabriel against this team, and he got it done. And he's kind of from that same skill set where he's a small guy with blazing speed, and I think that's one of the few ways to beat this Arizona defense that I think is actually pretty good, even though they haven't showed it. I think especially in terms of beating their corners, I really like that Brandon Cooks matchup for this week. I'm trying to think who we hadn't. Deshaun Jackson, I know we really didn't touch on him because we kind of talked about everyone else, but for tournaments, I really like the fact that, this defense is giving up a ton of yardage to opposing number 1 wideouts, and Deshaun Jackson's basically built on speed. I always go back to that Julio Jones week against Carolina, but, it's not just Julio Jones who's gotten it done. It's been pretty much all number 1 targets doing their thing against this Carolina team. So it's only going to take 1 actual reception, and I want to get your thoughts here. Because his price tag on DraftKings is just so unbelievably low that I'm having a hard time overlooking Allen Robinson this week.
Yeah.
It's a terrible matchup against Houston. I mean, he very well may be against Bouye, who's graded as one of the best 5 corners in football, but 4,400 for Allen Robinson against Houston. It's just, they're going to look for him in the red zone, I feel like. So the question is he going to catch one touchdown and make it worthwhile? Or just does he not have enough upside anymore to even consider using him at this price? I want to get your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, look, this guy has 137 targets this year, right? Or no, over he's got an incredible target binge, right? It's that's actually going back to his last 15 games, but yeah, it's very disappointing, right? But Houston is the game that one of the only games this year that he shined, right? I think it's his only 100-yard game was against Houston, and he caught 9 balls. But I was on Sirius last night talking to the guys, and they were asking about dynasty questions, like who would you still stick with Robinson? I would completely buy him because his skill set is still there. He's still the same guy. If you watch the tape, he still makes these acrobatic catches. It's just another regression situation for Bortles. He's similar to the guy on the other side, right? He's similar to Hopkins, except the difference is that Jacksonville doesn't have a scoring option in the backfield. They don't have a scoring option at tight end. Houston does have those things. So I still think the ceiling's there. It's there every week in theory. It really is. It's not a theory. It's actually there because the skill's there. He could even have one of those Baltimore games that he had earlier in the season where he had like 7 catches for 57 yards, 2 touchdowns. That's still 24 fantasy points. So, yeah, in tournaments, you have to consider him at that price point. I mean, he's priced the same price as Kenneth Farrow. And I'm not knocking Kenneth Farrow. I'm just saying, like, he's at the same price point as, as guys who just aren't in his class. He's below Mike Wallace, right? He's below Adam Thielen. He's below Devontae Parker. So it doesn't cost you anything to find out if you're wrong, right?
Exactly, exactly. And I just want to cap off the tournaments with saying, Sammy Watkins definitely a guy I want
Of
to
course, yeah, yeah.
include. I'm on Tyrod, admittedly, so definitely if I'm using him, I want to,
We can go for
pair
them
him.
in stacks as well. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the last guy I kind of like that we haven't mentioned anyone. I don't. Oh yeah, we have in the running back, but we've mentioned just one guy from this offense is Mike Wallace against Philadelphia. I mean, I think those Philly corners are beatable. And Wallace is another guy who's that deep threat, perfect for tournaments. If you're looking to fill a spot and he is the correct price, I mean, I have no problem going there. I mean, I think he is, 2 touchdown, 100-yard upside in this matchup. Did we miss anything at wide receiver?
No, that's it. I think again, I think running back is where you're going to have to really play the puzzle. You obviously have to work with a number of moving parts with every position, but receiver, I think we've established a pretty small core of cash guys, but there is still a ton of upside among these guys out here in the receiving banks. Even like the Taylor Gabriels of the world, guys like that we didn't really get to, they have upside. Tyreek Hill, they still have some tournament upside, but I think Watkins is a guy who will be a popular tournament guy, but for good reason. 94% snap rate last week. So, yeah, I think if you can get some of these discounted superstars, if you told me that I could afford Sammy Watkins and Allen Robinson for like 10K, that's impressive, at least for upside.
Agree with you there. Diggs my money guy in cash, Cook's my money guy in GPP this week. So let's see how that one turns out. Marcus Cooper has made me money before, so let's hope he falls down once again. But before we go and finish talking about wide receivers, again, Big Game 51, rotocurve.com/big-game. You can win all the wonderful things included with this package, including tickets that are upgraded, VIP tickets to that celebrity game with Antonio Brown, $800 in airfare credit, all you can eat, Texas tailgate, etc. So make sure you check that out. We will be back to cap off the week and put it all together, piece together the puzzle with NFL stacks.